Steve Mnuchin has been testifying before the House Appropriations Subcommittee. And one of the things that the members of the subcommittee want to look into is whether or not the White House has directed Mnuchin to avoid handing over Donald Trump's taxes. Now, there is a congressional investigation going on. Donald Trump has not released his taxes, and he claims that he hasn't released them because he's undergoing some sort of audit. Now, this is the longest audit of all time. He hasn't produced any type of evidence to indicate that he's actually undergoing an audit. But the Democrats in Congress specifically want to look into how the president's taxes are being audited by the IRS. That is the main reasoning that they cite in their letter to the IRS. But more importantly, they also want to look into potential conflicts of interest, potential fraud when it comes to deflating his assets and what he's worth when he files his taxes. There's a number of different reasons why they want to look into this. Now, with that said, the Treasury Secretary, Steve Mnuchin, is supposed to follow the law, follow the guidelines, and give Congress access to the tax returns. But he is aggressively fighting this, and there's some reason to believe that maybe the White House has directed him not to give the taxes to the House members looking for this. So Democrats, to be specific, are asking for 6 years of Trump's returns using a federal law that says the Treasury Secretary shall furnish the records upon the request of House or Senate chairman. The process is designed to be walled off from White House interference. So that's really the heart of the issue here. This is what congressional Democrats want to figure out. Is Steve Mnuchin being told by Donald Trump and the rest of his lackeys to avoid complying with this law? Now let's hear from Steve Mnuchin over the Trump taxes today.
Has anybody in the administration communicated with anybody in your office about this decision?
Our legal department has had conversations prior to receiving the letter with the White House General Counsel. I believe that the communication between our legal department and the White House General Counsel was informational, that we obviously had read in the press that we were expecting this.
So they communicated just to say expect this, or did they talk about their views in any way, shape, or form as to how you should respond?
Again, Mr. Chairman, I want to be clear. I personally wasn't involved in those conversations. Again, I want to be very clear and not be misleading. I acknowledge that there were conversations. I am not briefed on the full extent of those conversations.
So his story is a little different today, based on what he had said yesterday. Yesterday, he seemed to make it somewhat clear that there was some direction coming from the White House, and today he's denying that. Perhaps he realized what the law was. But what do you guys make of this?
It really seemed like he should have come prepared, saying, hey, I wasn't informed or privy to those conversations. It's like you knew you were coming before this committee to be able to answer these questions, so you should have sat down and gotten the information you needed. But now they're gonna have to take a break or maybe go get that information at a later date. And it just seems like he's just continuing to be evasive, even though I did like how he showed the man respect this time as opposed to Maxine Waters. That was fun.
The operative words, the man. So remember when Trump visited the border and he talked to the border agents and he somehow walked in front of cameras and said, yeah, I just told them to ignore the law and then to turn away asylum seekers. And if a judge comes for you, say, I'm sorry, we're full, we just can't do it. And people around those border agents, their superiors said, as soon as Trump turned his back, they said, if you guys follow his illegal orders, it's gonna be on you. This is the same thing. And we've heard about these reports. It's why, since the beginning, since he was running for president and since he first got in, there's always these reports that say, this is the temperament this president has. This is the way he approaches people that surround him. This is the way he approaches people he tells what to do. And people thought it's just willy-nilly talking trash about him. It says what type of person he's gonna be when it comes to the law. So in this case, the law says you can't come over and talk to your Treasury Secretary about what you're gonna do with the tax returns because that's where the law is set up. Instead, he goes and does it, and all it does, it takes the people that are beneath you and puts them on the spot. Now Steve Mnuchin sitting in front of a subcommittee talking about things that Donald Trump potentially told his department to do with the tax returns illegally, and he's gotta take the heat for it. But they continue to put themselves through this grinder when one guy who has a total disregard for the law tells everyone else to break it for him.
And everyone around him gets in trouble. And part of me is like, when will people pick up on this? That, hey, why don't I not put my livelihood and my life in jeopardy, especially since I've seen what goes down when everyone else goes down and it's never Trump.
Yeah, I mean, people are obsessed with power. And when you're obsessed with power, when that is one of the most important things in your life, you are blind to the ramifications of, associating yourself with this type of administration. So what Mnuchin says during these hearings is one thing, but what are the facts? What do we know? Well, according to the Washington Post, on April 5th, lawyers for Trump sent the Treasury Department General Counsel a letter telling him not to release the records until the Justice Department has issued a new legal opinion.
Oh my God.
So we oftentimes talk about how there is a two-tier justice system in America, how people in positions of power are able to skirt the law. Donald Trump has been able to do that his entire life. And in this case, it appears that his lackeys are doing what they can to fight congressional Democrats on the release of his taxes. And again, the question for me at least is, what is he hiding? What is in those taxes? Now, it could be something as small as embarrassment. Maybe he's embarrassed that he's really not worth as much as he's been touting publicly. But I'm also more concerned about whether or not there is some foreign influence, financial influence, and whether or not he is making decisions based on his own profit motive as opposed to the best interests of the American people. That's another issue. I want to know whether or not he's been committing fraud and deflating his assets for the purposes of filing his taxes and making it appear that he's not really worth that much and he shouldn't be taxed that much. I don't know. I don't know what's in them. But rather than speculating or having people speculate about what he's possibly involved in, he should release his taxes.
And maybe I missed this, but in terms of, because we file state and federal, have any of the states he's filed with been willing to release the taxes? Especially New York, since they're already going after him in so many regards, I would like to think that they could find a legally valid reason to essentially release or go after him for his taxes, and then we get to see how that money is computed, and then we could kind of speculate as to how the federal taxes would be treated.
That's a really great question. It is. I don't know. There hasn't really been much reporting on that.
There was some of the lawmakers in New York were trying to set up a safeguard in case the federal level their attempts fail to get taxes. They're trying to set, but they need to put an amendment to some of their laws to find a way to get those tax returns in that state. And that's just the beginning of it. I'm not sure if the degree to which they need to change it, but New York, as you said, you probably mentioned New York's probably the first one that would make some moves on that. And it's probably multiple states, of course. And it probably depends on their own laws, I guess.
And I want to take just a quick step back and look at the broader picture of what's happening with the Republican Party specifically. Yesterday, we reported on a story involving an investigation that's been launched by Representative Elijah Cummings, a Democrat, into pharmaceutical drug pricing. He and other congressional Democrats want to figure out why it is that Americans are paying so much more for pharmaceutical drugs, especially when you compare what we pay to other countries and what they pay. And congressional Republicans have contacted these pharmaceutical companies and urged them to avoid complying with this investigation. So this is a form of obstruction. We're seeing it when it comes to a specific policy issue like the pricing of pharmaceutical drugs, and we're now seeing it when it comes to protecting Donald Trump, who could potentially be compromised by his financial dealings with other countries. Again, we don't know. We don't know. We can only speculate because we don't have the taxes in front of us. But there's something in there that he does not want people to know about. Otherwise, he wouldn't have all his lackeys trying to find ways to help him skirt the law.
On the go? Don't worry, we got you covered. You can still listen to TYT at our new podcast network. Find us on Apple Podcasts, the Google Play Store, or at tyt.com/podcast.